Hello, friends, and welcome back. Today we've got 3 stories that all revolve around one dangerous assumption: that other people's boundaries, bodies, or safety are somehow negotiable. One involves a neighbor who decided a dog's good genes were community property. One takes place in a Starbucks over a single seat and a half-disassembled phone. And one unfolds at work where disbelief and allergies turned into a medical emergency. Different settings, different stakes, but the same core mistake in all 3. By the end, we're going to compare what actually worked, and you'll get a vote which story handled it best. My neighbor thought my dog's good genes were community property. The police explained property law to her. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and I have a golden retriever named Luna. She's not just a dog to me, she's my constant shadow, my emotional support, my routine, and honestly, the best part of my day. I raised her from a clumsy, oversized paw puppy into a calm, affectionate adult dog who thinks everyone is her friend. I'm careful with her, protective of her, and very intentional about what happens to her body and her life. Last night, I went out with friends. Nothing wild, just a late night of drinks and laughing that turned into a very late Uber ride home around 2 a.m. Before I left, I made sure Luna had a full bowl of water, plenty of toys, and access to the backyard she loves. It's fully fenced, well lit, and usually the safest place for her when I'm gone for a few hours. When I got home, tipsy but happy, I stepped into the yard to check on her like I always do. That's when my foot caught on something soft and warm in the grass. I nearly face-planted before I realized what I was looking at. Luna was lying in the middle of the lawn, tangled up with another dog, both of them restrained with makeshift leashes tied together. The other dog was Mr. Snuggles, my next-door neighbor Susan's poodle mix. Mr. Snuggles is one of those doodle hybrids with a high-maintenance haircut and a name that sounds like it came from a toddler. Susan, who's in her 50s, is deeply invested in what she calls ethical breeding, which mostly involves lecturing anyone within earshot about designer dogs while somehow owning one herself. We've clashed more than once over her opinions, especially after I told her I had zero interest in breeding Luna. Standing there in the dark, staring at my dog tied to someone else's, my stomach dropped. I immediately untied Luna, checked her over, and pulled her close. She was shaking, confused, and clearly stressed, but thankfully not injured. That's when Susan's porch light flicked on and she came out in her robe like she'd been waiting for an audience. "Oh, good, you're home," she said brightly. "I was hoping you'd understand." I asked her, very slowly, what the hell she thought she was doing. She didn't even pretend to be confused. She told me she had let Mr. Snuggles out while she was resting and figured nature would take its course. She said it like she'd borrowed a cup of sugar, not violated every boundary imaginable. Susan explained that she wanted golden doodle puppies and thought Luna was the perfect candidate. She went on about Luna's coat, her temperament, her healthy genes, and how wasteful it would be not to take advantage of them. I was standing there, barefoot, holding my shaking dog, trying not to scream. Susan's warped ethics reframed violation as opportunity. In her mind, Luna wasn't a loved companion, she was an unlocked resource, and consent was just a bureaucratic hurdle to her ethical business plan. I told her she had absolutely no right to touch my dog, let alone try to breed her without my consent. Susan waved me off and said I was being dramatic. She claimed Luna didn't seem to mind and that dogs don't have hang-ups like people do. When I said Luna is spayed, Susan's face fell for exactly 1 second before she recovered and said, "Well, accidents happen." That's when she dropped the part that made my blood run cold. Susan told me she had already lined up buyers. She had friends who wanted puppies. She had prices in mind. She even suggested we could split the profit like this was some kind of business partnership. She genuinely expected me to be grateful that she'd included me. I told her to get back inside her house and stay away from my dog. Susan immediately flipped the script and accused me of sabotaging her venture and being selfish. She said I was denying people the joy of ethical bred puppies and ruining something she'd worked hard to plan. When I said I was calling the police, she laughed and told me they'd never take something like this seriously. She was wrong. I called the non-emergency line and explained that my neighbor had trespassed, restrained my dog, and attempted to breed her without permission. The dispatcher went very quiet and told me officers were on the way. Susan's confidence evaporated the moment the cruisers pulled up. The officer separated us and asked questions. I showed them photos of Luna's spay records, the rope Susan had used, and messages Susan had sent me in the past about breeding potential. Susan tried to explain her side, framing it as a misunderstanding, but she didn't help herself by admitting she might have hoped something would happen. One officer looked at her and said, "Ma'am, you don't get to experiment with someone else's property, let alone their pet." Another officer explained that what she did could fall under animal cruelty and attempted theft of property. Susan went pale and suddenly couldn't find her words. They issued her a citation for trespassing and animal endangerment, warned her about further charges if she contacted me again, and documented everything. I was advised to install cameras and given information on filing a restraining order if necessary. After they left, Susan stood on her porch, silent for once, watching as I carried Luna back inside. Luna slept glued to my side the rest of the night. This morning, I scheduled a vet visit just to be safe, ordered security cameras, and blocked Susan on every possible platform. Susan wanted a business. What she got was a police report, a very clear warning, and a neighborhood reputation that'll follow her longer than any designer puppy ever could. This wasn't ignorance, it was a deliberate decision to override consent and treat a living being as a resource. Susan assumed the law wouldn't apply because her intentions sounded ethical in her own head. The second police involvement entered the scene, that illusion collapsed. Boundaries stopped being theoretical and became enforceable. And our second story. A stranger tried to steal my friend's seat at Starbucks, then called the cops claiming I threatened them with a screwdriver. A few years back, I was sitting in a Starbucks helping a friend fix her phone. This wasn't some casual if you tried turning it off and on situation. I had the phone fully opened, tiny screws laid out carefully, the back panel off, and components exposed. Anyone who's ever worked on a phone knows you don't just shove that stuff aside and move seats without risking disaster. We'd claimed a small bench-style table, both seats occupied. Hers by her drink and bag, mine by the phone parts spread out like a miniature operating room. My friend had just stepped outside for a minute to grab something from her car that I needed to finish the repair. Her drink was still there, condensation ring and all, and half the phone was very obviously disassembled across the bench. I was hunched over it, mini screwdriver in hand, focused, when I noticed someone stop right next to the table. I looked up and immediately got that sinking feeling, you know the one, the look that says, this person is about to be a problem. This entitled little twaffle, probably early 20s, Starbucks cup already in hand, pointed at the empty seat and said, "We need to sit there." Not asked, declared. I blinked, looked at the seat, then at the phone guts spread everywhere. "Sorry," I said calmly, "that seat's in use. There's no space anyway." They huffed and put on the most exaggerated, sarcastic voice imaginable. Well, there's obviously no one sitting there now. I gestured to the drink, the bag, the phone in pieces. My friend's right outside, and I'm in the middle of repairing her phone. This isn't exactly something I can move. They rolled their eyes, then without another word sat down anyway. Right on the edge of the bench, right next to a neat line of screws no bigger than grains of rice. Then they started moving their arms around in these big, careless sweeps like they were about to casually knock everything onto the floor. I reacted on instinct, sliding my arm across the bench to block them, still holding the tiny screwdriver. Not raised, not pointed, just in my hand because I was literally using it. "Hey," I snapped more sharply now, "don't do that. You're about to knock my stuff off." They scoffed. "You don't own the table, and you don't get to shove someone else's things onto the floor," I shot back. "There are plenty of open seats." We went back and forth like that for a minute, them insisting they were allowed to sit wherever they wanted, me refusing to move because, again, half a phone was disassembled in front of me. It was clear they weren't planning to back down, but neither was I. I wasn't about to sacrifice my friend's phone because someone felt entitled to a specific seat. Then they smirked, pulled out their phone, and said, "If you don't stop, I'm calling the police." I laughed, out loud. I couldn't help it. "Fine," I said, "go right ahead." And they did. They actually called the police, right there in the Starbucks. While I sat there stunned, they stared straight at me, voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear, and said into the phone, "Yeah, this woman threatened to stab me with a screwdriver." Calling the cops wasn't a panic move. It was a tactical nuke. They escalated to the highest authority they could imagine over a bench seat, believing the mere threat of institutional force would make you fold. I let out the most incredulous laugh of my life. You know that's complete bullcrap, I said. You're trying to steal my friend's seat, and you were about to knock her phone parts onto the floor. They didn't even flinch, just ended the call, stood up, and said, "The cops are coming," with this smug, crap-eating grin. Then they marched outside to wait like they just delivered a flawless performance. I sat there for a second, adrenaline buzzing, then looked back down at the phone. At that point, I was almost done anyway, so I finished the repair, put the phone back together, tested it, powered it on. Perfect. My friend came back in, confused but relieved, and I explained what happened in a low voice. We debated just leaving, but then I thought, no, absolutely not. Right as we were packing up, the cops walked in. We stood up to leave, took a few steps, and then I stopped. Actually, I said, no, I'm not running from this. I walked straight over to the officers. "Hey," I said, calm as anything, "I'm the person someone outside called about. I was repairing a phone. Here are the tools. This is the phone. They tried to push my stuff onto the floor because they wanted a seat." One of the cops didn't even look surprised. He gave me this tired, knowing look and glanced toward the window where the entitled little psycho was pacing. Then he sighed and said, "Yeah, we know." That was it. No questions, no suspicion, no lecture. Just a dismissal so casual it was almost funny. "You're good," he added. "You can go." So we left. As we walked past the window, I caught a glimpse of the Twaffle's face when they realized the cops weren't coming over to arrest me. The smugness evaporated, replaced by pure disbelief. The whole thing was ridiculous enough that it became one of those stories I'd occasionally tell friends. Then, a few years later, I was scrolling through a local housing group online when something caught my eye. Someone had posted a long warning about a potential roommate. The behavior described was familiar. Changing locks on roommates, throwing out other people's belongings, calling the police over petty disputes, escalating everything to nuclear levels. And then there was a photo. I stared at it for a long moment. Same face, same expression, same vibe of someone who lives entirely on entitlement and spite. Was it definitely the same person? I can't say with absolute certainty. But if it walks like a crap goblin, argues like a crap goblin, and calls the cops because it didn't get its way at a Starbucks bench, odds are pretty damn good. And our last story. Karen didn't believe in allergies, then watched an ambulance take her boss away. I used to work in one of those offices where everyone mostly kept their heads down and did their jobs, rows of gray cubicles, fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to drive you slightly insane, and a break room that always smelled like burned coffee and resentment. People weren't friends, exactly, but we were civil. You showed up, sent emails, complained quietly about deadlines, and went home. The only thing even remotely notable about our team dynamic was our boss, Mark. Mark was actually a decent manager, which already made him a unicorn in corporate life. He was calm, fair, and didn't play favorites. Early on, during one of his first team meetings, he explained something that was important for everyone to know. "I have a severe peanut allergy," he said plainly. "It's the life-threatening kind. Even trace exposure can cause anaphylaxis. HR has it on file, but I just want everyone to be aware. Please don't bring peanut products into shared food situations. No drama, no guilt trip, just information." Everyone nodded and moved on. Everyone except Karen. Karen was the kind of coworker who treated her opinions like peer-reviewed research. She was loud, smug, and deeply convinced that modern medicine existed mostly to coddle weak people. She'd corner anyone within earshot and lecture them about how everyone has allergies now, and how back in her day people ate questionable food and survived just fine. I heard her once in the break room saying, if allergies were that serious, people wouldn't even be able to leave their houses. She laughed like she'd said something clever. Over time, it became clear that Karen had a particular fixation on Mark's allergy. She'd roll her eyes whenever food policies came up. She'd mutter things like, "He looks fine to me," or "Funny how he's allergic but still alive." A few people mentioned it to HR, but Karen was careful enough that nothing stuck. She never outright threatened anything. She just planted seeds of doubt and smug disbelief everywhere she went. The incident happened during a Friday lunch meeting that was supposed to be a morale booster. Potluck style, everyone brings something, sit around pretending we weren't counting the minutes until the weekend. Mark, as usual, brought his own food in a clearly labeled container. He rarely trusted communal meals, but he stayed for the social aspect. Karen showed up late with a big tray of homemade cookies and announced it like she was presenting an award. "I made these special," she said loudly, setting them down in the center of the table. Someone asked, half joking, "Peanut-free?" Karen smiled, wide and theatrical. "Oh, of course. I'm not trying to kill anyone." A few people laughed awkwardly. Mark hesitated, then took half a cookie after another coworker reassured him they looked safe. Within minutes, something was very wrong. Mark stopped mid-sentence and pressed a hand to his chest. His face flushed red, then blotchy. His breathing turned shallow and fast, like he was running out of air. "I don't feel right," he said, standing up so quickly his chair tipped over. Then he collapsed onto the floor. Everything after that blurred together. Someone screamed for help. Another coworker grabbed Mark's bag and pulled out his EpiPen, hands shaking as they administered it. Mark's throat was visibly swelling, his lips turning blue. I was on the phone with 911 trying to explain between breaths that our boss was having an anaphylactic reaction. Karen stood frozen near the table, whispering over and over, "I didn't think it was real." Her whispering wasn't just shock. It was the collapse of her entire worldview. She had treated his allergy as a personality quirk, a bid for attention. Reality, in the form of his swelling throat and blue lips, was a brutal correction. Paramedics arrived fast, thank God. They loaded Mark onto a stretcher, oxygen mask strapped tight, IV already in place. As they wheeled him out, the room went completely silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Karen finally broke the quiet by saying in a small, confused voice, "I didn't think allergies worked like that." Nobody responded. What Karen didn't account for was how much evidence she'd left behind. The break room had cameras, and the footage showed her alone earlier that morning, adding something from a small bottle into part of the cookie dough. Multiple coworkers came forward with months of comments she'd made mocking Mark's allergy. HR pulled Slack messages and emails where she dismissed medical concerns as exaggeration. It painted a very clear picture. Mark survived, but the ER doctor later said that if treatment had been delayed even a few more minutes, the outcome could have been catastrophic. He was out of work for weeks. When he came back, he didn't come quietly. Police were involved. The footage was handed over. Witness statements were collected. Karen tried to claim it was an accident, that she didn't know peanut oil counted, that she thought a small amount couldn't hurt anyone. That defense fell apart the moment an allergist testified. The doctor explained in painfully simple language that deliberately exposing someone to a known allergen is medically equivalent to poisoning. There is no safe test dose. The words criminal negligence and reckless endangerment came up repeatedly, and Karen visibly shrank every time they were said. She was fired before the criminal case even concluded. The civil lawsuit that followed was brutal. Medical expenses, lost income, emotional distress, and punitive damages stacked up fast. Every time Karen tried to defend herself, she came back to the same line, "I honestly thought he was exaggerating." That sentence followed her everywhere, and it never helped her. Mark eventually returned to work. New policies were rolled out, mandatory training, signs posted everywhere, food rules that no one dared challenge, and Karen? No job, a criminal record, and a civil judgment that'll probably follow her for the rest of her life. All because she decided someone else's life was a science experiment and that her opinion mattered more than a doctor's warning. When you put these three stories side by side, the pattern is unmistakable. The first shows consent enforced through law before permanent harm occurred. The second shows entitlement collapsing the moment facts replaced theatrics. And the third shows what happens when boundaries are ignored until the consequences are unavoidable. Same core issue, people treating others as tools, obstacles, or experiments. 3 responses, 3 outcomes. The real difference isn't who was angrier, it's which response stopped the behavior before it could go further. Which response handled it best? Vote in the comments and tell us why. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.